The camera opens on the marble calm of the White House portico. The American flag moves slightly in the autumn wind, and the press corps waits, notebooks ready, as President Donald J. Trump walks to the podium. What follows is not another trade announcement or foreign policy statement. It's a geopolitical rupture, the kind of statement that sends diplomats scrambling from Johannesburg to Brussels. In a move that stunned allies and adversaries alike, President Trump announced that no U.S. officials will attend the upcoming G20 Summit in South Africa, a nation he accuses without evidence of persecuting and murdering white citizens. He didn't make the declaration through the State Department or a press conference at the Rose Garden. Instead, it came as a post on his social media platform, Truth Social, in his trademark blunt language. It is a disgrace that the G20 is being held in South Africa, Trump wrote. Afrikaners are being killed and massacred, and their lands and farms are being illegally seized. No U.S. government official will attend while these human rights violations continue. Within minutes, the post ricocheted across the world's diplomatic networks. The U.S. National Security Council confirmed that Vice President J.D. Vance, who had been slated to attend the summit, would not go. American representation at one of the world's most influential economic gatherings simply withdrawn. For Trump, the move was more than symbolic. It was political theatre with consequences. His claim of a so-called white genocide in South Africa has long circulated among far-right networks online, but no credible evidence supports it. South Africa's own government calls it a baseless racist myth. The statistics, they point out, show that violence in the country affects all communities, not just one. Yet, the president's message found its audience. Among his supporters, the post was seen as another example of Trump standing up against what he called global hypocrisy. The South African Foreign Ministry, in response, issued a sharply worded statement. South Africa rejects with contempt the inflammatory and false allegations made by the President of the United States. Our democracy protects the rights of all citizens equally. Inside Washington, the reaction was mixed. Some Republican senators quietly supported the idea of a boycott, while diplomats warned that the U.S. risked isolating itself from a continent whose economic power is steadily rising. Trump, however, was already looking ahead. He used the moment to pivot toward a different vision, the 2026 G20 Summit, to be hosted in Miami, specifically at his own property, the Doral Resort. Standing beside Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Miami Mayor Francis Suarez, Trump smiled as he spoke to reporters. His words were pure Trumpian flourish. It's the best location. It's all beautiful, he said. In fact, they asked for it to be there because the location is the best. And we won't be making any money off it. We're doing a deal where there won't be any money involved. There's no money in it. I just want it to go well. Every country will have its own building. I think it will be a really beautiful thing. For his critics, this sounded like déjà vu. The echoes of 2019, when Trump's first-term administration had proposed holding the G7 at the same resort, drawing accusations of conflict of interest, were impossible to ignore. But Trump brushed it off. Doral has been very, very successful, he said proudly, one of the most successful properties in the country. What he left unsaid was that in 2025, holding a G20 summit at a Trump property is not just about hospitality, it's about power. It symbolically recasts the global stage as an extension of his personal empire. Meanwhile, the implications of the South Africa boycott continued to unfold. For Pretoria, the absence of US officials is more than a diplomatic snub. It is a signal, one that could ripple through trade, defense, and international cooperation. South Africa, as host, had hoped the summit would spotlight African economic potential and green transition projects. Now, the absence of Washington may instead turn it into a showcase of alternative alliances led by China, India, and Russia. Beijing quickly issued a measured response. A Chinese foreign ministry spokesperson said the G20 is a platform for cooperation, not division. We believe all nations should attend in the spirit of dialogue. Moscow, by contrast, praised Trump's stance. Russian state media called the boycott a courageous act exposing Western double standards. Back in the US, reactions poured in across the political spectrum. Progressive lawmakers denounced the rhetoric as racially charged and dangerous. Senator Cory Booker said in a statement, invoking the language of white genocide is beyond irresponsible. It endangers communities and fuels extremist narratives. But conservative commentators saw it differently. On right-leaning talk shows, the decision was framed as a defense of Western farmers under threat, another America First moment in global politics. As the debate raged, the economic side of the announcement came into focus. The Trump administration had quietly moved the same week to reduce the number of refugees admitted into the United States to a record low of 7,500 per year, explicitly prioritizing white South Africans under what officials described as emergency humanitarian exemptions. Critics called it an act of selective empathy, closing the door to war-torn migrants from the Middle East and Africa while extending it to a narrow group from one country. Trump's tariff policies reinforced that message. South Africa now faces a 30% tariff on exports to the United States, the highest in sub-Saharan Africa. The White House justified it as retaliation for what it called unfair trade practices and failure to protect American investments. Economists, however, see the measures as politically motivated, likely to hurt American importers more than South African producers. As the global press analysed the implications, one theme emerged: Washington is stepping away from multilateralism again. The G20, designed as a platform for cooperation on global finance, climate and development, was losing one of its founding voices. From the corridors of the State Department to the offices of African diplomats, the question was the same: what happens when the United States stops showing up? In Pretoria, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa convened an emergency meeting of his cabinet. Though the government's public tone was restrained, insiders said there was genuine shock at the severity of Trump's language. Ramaphosa's spokesperson called it a dangerous distortion of facts that undermines years of cooperation. In Washington, the fallout continued. The Department of State's Africa Bureau scrambled to reassure partners that U.S. aid and investment programs would continue independently of summit attendance. But behind closed doors, officials admitted they had been blindsided by the president's Truth Social post. The move left allies like the European Union in an awkward position. Brussels had hoped to use the Johannesburg summit to coordinate debt relief plans for African economies hit by climate shocks. Now, with the US seat empty, EU officials privately feared that China would dominate the conversation. And dominate it may. Beijing has already deepened its Belt and Road investments across southern Africa, including major infrastructure projects in Mozambique, Namibia and Zambia. For China, Trump's boycott creates a vacuum one it can fill with cash, contracts and influence. Within Africa, reactions were mixed. Some governments expressed solidarity with South Africa, calling the US decision an insult to the continent. Others, particularly in countries where populist or nationalist leaders hold sway, quietly applauded Trump's words, seeing them as a rebuke of Western liberal hypocrisy. The diplomatic theatre was also domestic. Trump's messaging tapped into his electoral base at home voters who view his foreign policy as an extension of American pride. His supporters flooded social media with hashtags like #StandWithFarmers and #Boycott G20SA, turning a diplomatic boycott into a culture war rallying cry. At rallies in Texas and Florida, Trump repeated the theme. He described his move as a stand for justice, saying, "We're not going to send our great people to a country where horrible things are happening. We have to speak up when no one else will." Opponents countered that the president was weaponizing misinformation. Human rights observers noted that South Africa's government does not condone violence against farmers and that most incidents are rooted in crime, not race. Yet the political calculus was clear. Trump's refusal to attend the G20, coupled with his promise to host the next one on US soil, paints him as both the disruptor and the savior, tearing down one summit to build his own. As the days passed, the diplomatic consequences deepened. The African Union issued a statement expressing regret and disappointment. European leaders called for calm, even traditional US Allies like Australia and Canada distanced themselves, saying they would attend the summit in full. For international observers, the boycott signals a shift in the architecture of global governance. The G20, once a symbol of post-financial crisis cooperation, is now fracturing along ideological lines. With Russia and China already challenging Western dominance within the bloc, America's withdrawal from Johannesburg adds another crack. In Miami, preparations for 2026 have already begun. The Doral Resort, sprawling lawns, palm trees, fountains glinting in the sunlight, is being reimagined as the next global stage. Trump's allies frame it as a restoration of prestige, bringing the G20 back home to America. But ethics experts question whether hosting it at a property owned by the sitting president crosses the constitutional line, separating public office from private gain. When pressed, Trump dismissed the criticism. "We're doing a deal where there won't be any money involved," he insisted. "There's no money in it. I just want it to go well." But the optics tell their own story, a leader who sees no boundary between his brand and his country's diplomacy. In the corridors of the United Nations, diplomats speak quietly of the new unilateralism. They note that the United States is increasingly setting conditions for engagement, attending summits only where it controls the narrative. South Africa, for its part, has vowed that the G20 will go ahead as planned. Ramaphosa's government says the absence of one delegation will not derail the shared agenda of global development. Still, the loss of America's voice and the controversies surrounding its reason ensures that the summit will be remembered less for policy breakthroughs and more for the storm that preceded it. As one senior EU diplomat put it bluntly, the United States has turned a development summit into a political battlefield. For historians, it may echo earlier moments, the 1,930 seconds, the 1,970 seconds when nations retreated inward amid global crises. But this time, the retreat is broadcast in real time through the president's own platform. Near the end of his message, Trump hinted at his larger ambition. "I look forward to hosting the 2026 G20 Summit in Miami, Florida." It was both a promise and a provocation, a declaration that he intends to shape global diplomacy, not just as president, but as proprietor. The world will arrive in Miami 2 years from now. But before then, the absence of America in Johannesburg will echo in the speeches of leaders, in the realignment of alliances, and in the quiet calculations of every capital wondering what the new rules of engagement will be. In the meantime, the image remains. The Truth Social post glowing on a phone screen in Washington as the President of the United States rewrites the choreography of diplomacy with a few sentences and an exclamation point. Because in this new age of geopolitics, a summit can be cancelled not by policy, but by a post